That's, now we know where it's going. Okay. Got it. Now we get, can we check the sound?
So how, what's, okay. you're using
U4.
microphones there.
So what do I need to do here? Anything?
You shouldn't, but let me just see.
How can I tell?
Does the microphone fill up at you?
Oh, let me go up. Let me go there.
Oh, yeah. Settings.
Microphone array.
Oh, right.
Which one is it? I got a couple different ones here.
It's,
I think it might be picking up that which we don't want. Yeah, we don't want smart sound. We want the mic.
Yeah, this is the one you want. Check 1, 2, 3, check. One, two, three.
Got it. Thank you, sir.
All right.
Mark your genius.
Just experienced.
True, but thank you.
Overall,
Ya vamos a la comida. No creo ya tanto bien.
Yes. Yes, it's you.
well, we talked for yesterday. I'm pretty sure. Well, she was more like, she's not happy with it. Yeah. Well, Sam, we want a neat pack. That was the next. I've just been delaying all week behind the scenes.
Diego just went to the other building. Ask Elmer.
Oh, for me?
Yeah, you Elma?
Yeah.
We need to take a call outside where you look.
Okay. Okay, let me go this way.
Okay. Not a problem. We got it. We got it.
Good morning.
Oh, yeah. You're tired? Oh, my
I know, man. Are you gonna start or is it a simple?
When she comes, she comes. Really, we're trying to watch. Are you going to lunch? Cheers. Are you staying? Yeah. Okay, then I need to be like more over here. Yeah, next to the food. Yeah, over here, please. Yeah, I'll send her. I use hi, I'm Laura. I met my mother a few weeks ago. Oh, gosh. You look like her. Thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna sit over there. Oh, okay. I need everybody to walk past me. Okay. Yeah,
Right. Oh, no, that camera.
The other bigger one, yes.
Yeah.
Last time, I moved up here, then I had to shift around and going back and forth like that.
How are you?
Yeah, that's where using that other camera and using like another copy of VX. Good morning, Shell.
How are you this morning?
I would like to move this. Because I don't have Zoom. I don't have Zoom focus. It's over here. Because I want to keep getting like, don't worry about that.
So it'll be at this mic?
Oh, yeah.
All right, everybody, we're going to get started. Please take a seat. Is the mic on? The mic working? Can everybody hear me? Okay. So if everyone could take a seat, we want to get started. We've got people waiting on the live stream to enjoy our presentation as well. And Maggie will still be here to sign books afterwards. Yeah. So are we on with the live stream? Sure. So I'm Charlotte Kibble from our Adult Ed Committee, and I'm very pleased, along with Julia Sandelman from our sisterhood and the rest of our Adult Ed Committee, and Julie Ogawa, who's here, who's our chair, to welcome you all to this really exciting opportunity to hear from Maggie Anton. This is Maggie Anton's third visit to Shir Hadash. So we have enjoyed her, and I hope she will enjoy us. She is an award-winning author, a Talmud scholar with expertise in Jewish women's history. She fell in love with Talmudic learning when in 1992, she joined her first class. Maggie had great interest in the scholar Rashi, who had only daughters. Out of this passion, her trilogy, Rashi's Daughters, was written. How many of us have read some of Rashi's Daughters? Good number in the room. Yeah. Several books have followed, including her nonfiction award-winning 50 Shades of Talmud, What the First Rabbis Had to Say About You Know What. And there was also Rav Hister's Daughter and the Enchantress, which my young daughters loved. Maggie has lectured about her writings the world over as she continues her studies of women and the Talmud. And just as Maggie's novels involve inclusion of women, our social justice committee is looking at inclusion of all voters, and you're all warmly invited to stay afterwards and write some postcards to voters in other states. There'll be an opportunity for that. And we will also have an opportunity for people interested in women in our tradition on the 1st and 3rd Thursdays of November at 11:30 with lunch following. So lots of exciting things to come. Welcome, Maggie. We're so happy you're with us.
There, see, it took you exactly as long as it.
Yes, sorry, one last thing. If anybody who's watching by live stream would like to ask a question, you can, or make a comment, you can text that to Julia. And the number for texting, I'll say it twice, is 408-656-6219. 408-656-6219. And then later, Julia will ask some of your questions.
Short people. Also, for the live screen people, if you want to buy any books, text it that you do to Julia, and I will sign and trust you that you will, you can leave a check and someone from the sisterhood will mail it to me. Okay, I'm going to ask all the folks in the back. You guys can hear me okay with this? Okay, I'm not a rabbi. You can sit in the front row. So thank you for the two ladies in the front row. So really move up. I'm not going to yell. I have 2 more gigs today. So I am not going to strain my vocal cords. So good. I got a couple of volunteers to come to the front row. So thank you, Shir Hadash, for inviting me. I've been here several times before, and I'm very impressed that anybody is here inside on this beautiful day. But I guess after it's over, you can go for a hike or take a walk. I mean, wow, did I get nice weather today? That'll probably jinx the whole thing. Anyway, you got this intro. And the first thing before I get into the choice is that, okay, they say you have to hear something like 5 times before you remember it. So you've only heard me twice. So some of this stuff may seem a little familiar. First of all, I never intended to be an author. I have a degree in chemistry from UCLA. I did not even take English in college. All these books with my name on it, frankly, it's still a mystery to me how that happened. But I know it started that I was a voracious reader when I was younger. And I grew up in a secular, as Ariella knows, a secular socialist household. We went to school together when we were much littler, like elementary school, junior high school. Yeah. All right. So one of the books that taught me about Judaism, or a set of books, The All of a Kind Family by Sidney Taylor. People still know that. And actually, when I later decided that I was going to write Rashi's Daughters, that was my template to immerse my readers in the family. And you went to shul with them and you did whatever they did, you were there. So that was a big inspiration to me. The other Jewish book when I was young was a really big inspiration was Exodus by Leon Uris. I had never studied, come on, when you're in the 50s in elementary school, no one talks about the Holocaust. That was my first, that's a hell of an introduction to, but anyway, I was so impressed that I vowed that I would name my first son Ari. I told that to all the guys I dated, which is, but it worked because I got a keeper. My husband, Dave, agreed readily. And our one and only son is indeed Ari. And Dave and I have been married for more than 50 years now. So we're not going to have any more sons. So anyway, that also impressed me. But the next set of books that I read when I was in college, Chaim Potak's The Chosen and The Promise. And that's when I learned there was such a thing as Talmud. I didn't learn any Talmud from reading those two books. He has no Gemara in there whatsoever. But I'll tell you how that inspired me with Rashi's Daughters just in a few minutes. But I also somehow figured out from the subtext of that women couldn't study Talmud. This was a guy's thing. So in 1992, when I heard about a woman's Talmud class being taught by Rachel Adler, who I used to say, oh, back then she wasn't even a rabbi. She didn't have her PhD. She wasn't a rabbi yet. Well, now she's already been a rabbi, been a professor. She's retired in Pittsburgh. So, but her name still resonates for Jewish women. So I heard she was teaching a woman's Talmud class. And believe me, in 1992, there was still no way a woman could study Talmud, unless if you lived in New York, you could go to Drisha, and apparently there was some yeshivot in Israel. Of course, I immediately signed up for it, right? All you have to do is forbid something and it becomes very, very attractive. As I say in Yiddish, auf salachas, you got to do it. So to my surprise, I fell in love with Talmud. I continued to study with Rachel for many years. And being in a woman's Talmud class, and we're studying Talmud, and Rashi's on every page, every line, she tells us Rashi has no sons, only daughters who are learned, wore tefillin. And all I can say is I must have been possessed, because I decided my kids were out of the nest, or they were leaving the nest, and my husband had a long commute, that I would see if those legends were true. And I live in Los Angeles. Actually, I was born in Los Angeles, and we still live in Los Angeles. So we have lots of rabbinic schools and their libraries, and UCLA, USC, Claremont colleges. And I found out, yes, Rashi's daughters were learned. Yes, they wore tefillin. Yes, he taught them. I mean, all the legends, not only were all the legends true, but things I never even imagined about the women in Rashi's community. They had aliyah to the Torah. They not just tefillin, they wore tzitzit. Some women blew the shofar at Rosh Hashanah. I mean, things that in the Orthodox world, women, if they could do it all now, they certainly couldn't do them 10 years ago. So I was so impressed by that community that I decided I would write something about it. I never expected that and since I was a voracious reader of fiction, I was going to write a novel, a book that I wanted to read. I didn't expect anyone else would ever read it. Frankly, I didn't expect I would finish it. But lo and behold, I finished it, and I gave it to some friends and rabbis to read, and they all said, oh, this is really great. You should get this out there. But of course, it was too long because it was 600 pages, single spaced. But it worked out great. Rashi had 3 daughters, so he broke it into a trilogy. Anyway, so I've sold out of them already. So, but you guys have seen me 3 times. Any of you who who didn't get Rashi's Daughters yet, sorry, go on Amazon, just buy it some way. So did Rashi's Daughters. Then Penguin, my publisher, said, you got any more Jewish heroines you want to write about, historical? And I said, as I do. And I wrote about Rav Hizda's daughter, who is the woman mentioned most in the Talmud of anybody. And the thing that intrigued me about her is she is sitting in her father's classroom, which is the living room, or we're talking 3rd century Babylonia, so I don't think they called it the living room. But anyway, the room where his students are, he suddenly calls up his 2 best students and he asks her, who do you want to marry? And she, this is why I wanted to write about her. She replies, both of them. And the younger one, clearly more quick-witted, says, I'll be the last one. And the Talmud tells us that's what happens. She marries the first one, she had some kids with him, she's widowed, and she marries the second one and lives happily ever after with both of them. So I thought, okay, this definitely calls for a novel. And it also would give me an opportunity to do research into the lives of the women in the men's community that wrote the Talmud. So I did that, and I was lecturing about, and at that point, I was now the expert on sex in the Talmud, because those of you who have read my books know that I like a hot sex scene as well as anyone. And remember, I'm reading the book I want to read. If you don't want a sex scene, well, fine, go read. There's a YA version of it, Rashi's Daughters, actually, that took all that out of there. But anyway, so I was lecturing to, I think it was a big Hadassah brunch in New Jersey, and they were serving wine, and there were no men there whatsoever. And so I was getting more into the research, because if I'm going to write hot sex scenes, they have to be halachic hot sex scenes. You know, I can't have Rashi and his daughters, you know, doing what they shouldn't be doing. And same thing with Rav Hizda's daughter. And she had 2 husbands. So that was fun writing to compare and contrast and, you know, double mint gum commercial stuff. So anyway, one of them at the end, remember they'd had wine at this brunch. Sansom says, "Oh, you should write 50 Shades of Talmud." And everybody laughed. But on the way back to where I was staying that night, I thought, yeah, that would, and it would be really easy. I wouldn't need 300, 3 years of research, because I keep track of every page of Talmud I've studied in a Word document. And for clergy or anybody who's interested, it's 40 pages, single spaced. Every piece of Talmud every page that I've read, with a sentence or two, what it is, so that when people email me and said, "You made up that Talmud, that's not really in there," I could say, absolutely, it is, and here's where it is. And believe me, I got those kind of emails. So I thought, okay, I got all my Word doc. I'll just look for 50 mentions of Talmud. And I wasn't sure what I would do with it, but it turns out there were a lot more than 50. So that was even better. And then I said, I'll just put it together, a little, kind of fun book. If it's going to be called 50 Shades of Talmud, well, it has to be a fun book. And so I wrote it, and my daughter edited it, and she says, this is really, even though it's sex, it's kind of boring. You have footnotes in there, and put the footnotes in, put it in the back, the references. And she said, it would be better if you had some pithy sayings appropriate from modern Jewish scholars like Amy Schumer and Mae West and Billy Crystal and Groucho Marx. And so I found quite a lot of pithy sayings. That was the research I did. It was a lot of fun. And also then someone else read it and said, actually, this would be really nice if you had black and white New Yorker kind of cartoons. And I thought, well, wait a second, that would be really expensive. But actually, publishers, no, we can hire designers. If I come up with a cartoon and the punchline, we'll have a guy draw them for you. So we have 18 cartoons in there too. This book was not how I anticipated. Anyway, so I think I had not spoken about 50 Shades of Talmud here yet. But anyway, I do have a bunch of them still. And I have them, and you can get a deal. If you buy the choice for discounted at 15, I'll throw in 50 Shades of Talmud for $5. So there you are. All right, now we get to, you wonder, okay, wait, what is she talking about? The choice. I was going on book tour, probably with Rashi's Daughters, staying at somebody's house. And like any good Jewish households, and I really did not have time, because I ended up with a lunch yesterday and a dinner, and I did not get to look through all the Jewish books that Susan has in her house. And I saw that there were lots of them. And normally that's what I do when I'm staying at people's houses. Anyway, I was at somebody's house, and there was The Chosen and The Promise. And I thought, I haven't read these in a long time. I'll start rereading them. And if I don't finish them while I'm here, it doesn't matter, because I already know how they end. But I didn't realize as I started reading them, it's like, wait a second, where's the women? There's conveniently our hero, the Orthodox guy. He's like Bambi, only you never even get to see his mother die. She's already gone when he's 2 years old. He doesn't remember her at all. He doesn't know her name. They never say Kaddish for her. They don't go to the cemetery. There's no photos of her in the house. Like she's invisible, except obviously he's alive. So he must have had a mother, especially in the 1930s. There wouldn't have been any kind of, medical stuff. And the other one, the Hasidic guy, his mother is nameless also. You barely see her. The few times you see her, she's in the kitchen. Whereas the research I've done in the Hasidic world, the Rebbitzin is the second most powerful person in that community because all the women go to her. They're not about to go to the Rebbe. They're not allowed to be alone with a man, let alone discuss whatever their problems were. And believe me, the Rebbitzins heard it all. So she knows the answers to the women's problems. And if she doesn't, she asks her husband. So anyway, by that point, I'm a card-carrying feminist, and I was really ticked that, come on, no women, no backstory, nothing. But then I read Davita's Harp by Chaim Potok, which he wrote many years later, and this one, his only book with a female protagonist. And he didn't write female point of views very well. The critics kind of didn't like that. So even though he intended a sequel, he didn't write it. He went back to writing about guys. And so anyway, I'm reading Davita's Harp, and this is interesting. And I get to the last chapter when she's graduating grade school. And she is undoubtedly the best student. And she has wanted to study Talmud, but they won't let her because it's forbidden. Women do not study Talmud. So they give her some other kind of award, the Bible award, this or that. She does not get the award for being the best student. Who is her classmate? But the hero of The Chosen and The Promise, this is where he went to grade school. I'm going, what is he doing there? Why did Potok stick him back in a book he wrote 30 years later? And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Chekhov's gun. The great playwright made a rule. If you're going to have a gun appear, she's already nodding, she knows. If you're going to have a gun appear in Act 1 or Chapter 1, it better go off by the end of the book, or your audience, your readers are going to be really annoyed. And they're going to be totally distracted because they're waiting to see this gun go off. And then the play ends. It's like, what? The gun is still. So anyway, I thought this had to be Potok's gun, because why did he put this character in there? So that's when I started, I should say, the way I think of my plots and all that is, I think in the middle of the night when it's 4 o'clock in the morning and things are bothering me that I can't do anything about it 4 o'clock in the morning. So I thought, like, okay, how would he obviously intended for them to get together. And even if he didn't, who cares? I could write that, but I could write it putting in the backstory of the mothers. I could make this a 2-generation novel, because we have both mothers who are invisible, and which is good for me because I can create any kind of backstory that I want. Well, the Hasidic one will still be Hasidic, and the other one would end up married to the hero's father. Everybody's looking, is there a clock? No. Okay, so good. I'm not even going to ask how long I have. So, because I do have a kind of set thing that I do, but it wanders off. So I thought I would really, and I started imagining how I would fire Potok's gun and get these characters back together and fill in the backstory, make it a feminist thing, fill in the backstory of the mothers. And of course, this is Maggie Anton here. They're going to be Talmud in there. And I thought, this is my chance. In my other books, in Rashi's book, and I must admit, Potok inspired me because he had no Gemara in any of his books, even the ones, that are set in the Talmud world. And so I said, okay, I'm going to do like with All of a Kind family. When Rashi is teaching his daughter's Talmud, my readers are in the room. They're going to learn Talmud too. And I put in all the, all my favorite Rashis in there. I did not organize them by subject or anything like that. But I said at this point, and I figure this is a chance to give a curriculum. This is a chance to pick my pieces of Talmud which are going to explain all the inequalities and disadvantages and the way the rabbis in the Talmud have, the word I was about to use is so inappropriate that it is appropriate. So the way that the rabbis have left, given women the shaft, shall we say, in Jewish law and custom. Things are very different now, which is one of the things I very much enjoyed, is taking my readers on the journey from how it was in Talmudic times, in medieval times, in Rashi's times, to 1950s Brooklyn, and pointing the arrow to where we are now, 50 years later. So I picked out, and by this time I knew exactly which pieces of Talmud I would use. And I started with like easy ones so that my readers would get a simple piece of Talmud and one that just introduces the subject of the inequality of women in ritual observance. Many of you look old enough to remember the days that women did not wear a tallis, that women did not have aliyah to the Torah, that there were all kinds of mitzvahs and ritual observances that women didn't do. It wasn't so much that they couldn't do, is that they didn't, and nobody wanted to be the first one to wear a tallis in her synagogue. And you can't just say, okay, I think I'll have an aliyah. The powers that be has to do that. And in the Orthodox world, women didn't even go, didn't go in the sukkah, even though they're the ones making all the food to put it in the sukkah. And in terms of a mitzvah that is easy to do, you got to eat your food somewhere. So why not eat it in the sukkah? So, and there's some of the women's mitzvah, some of the mitzvot that women are exempt from still, even counting the Omer. What does that take? 10 seconds? Anyway, so I start into why women don't do those particular mitzvot, and it's from the Talmud, and how that evolved. And in Rashi's community, the women, I don't know whether they rebelled or they just off Solukas did it, but women in Rashi's community did all the men's mitzvot. They even had aliyah to the Torah, and they certainly wore tzitzit. So now that we don't only maybe in the Haredi world do women not do all of those mitzvot that men do. It's over, it's done. If you want to wear a tallis, you wear it. If you want to wear a kippah, you wear it. If you want to sit in the sukkah, you sit. If you want an aliyah, you got to learn how to do it. But so that one has completely, I guess you could say, solved. Women have the same ritual obligations as men. The next one that is really the crux of the whole thing is that women have been literally forbidden to study Talmud. And that one is such a complicated argument that I didn't have my heroine learn it from my hero as he's teaching her the other stuff. I have him get into an argument with the Hasidic one. The Hasidic one, who, by the way, is the great Talmud scholar and has a photographic memory. And that argument I like so much, it's even on my on the Choice website as an excerpt, so that you could read just that particular piece, because it's a very complicated argument that only got resolved. Even in the 1950s, it hadn't been resolved. The way it finally got resolved in 1973, when they opened Drisha, the Talmud Academy for women, Orthodox, in New York. And that opened the gates to women studying Talmud. Now all the Jewish day schools, the women study Talmud, same as the boys, or maybe more than the boys, because the boys' Talmud is like, oh no, absolutely. But for girls, it's like, wow, I'm the first one, first one of my friends, or my mom didn't get to study Talmud. My older sister didn't get to study. So the girls are flooding in. And honestly, I never thought that I would live long enough to see women Orthodox rabbis who clearly have to study Talmud. The only argument about it is what exactly to call them, because they don't call them rabbis. Sometimes rabbah, rabbanit, all these different ways that you could say rabbi with the feminine. And actually, when the first woman rabbi came to Beth Jacob in Los Angeles, one of the first ones in America, they really didn't know what to call her. And they just said, welcome to our new female clergy when she came for the first time. I think they probably call her rabbi now, but so we've made it all the way to the point that women study Talmud, study Jewish texts, study everything you need in order to be a rabbi and even a judge in some of these rabbinic courts in Israel. Women are there as authorities. So they've certainly gotten to the point where if you want to study Talmud, go for it. And actually, now that we have the internet, you can study Talmud online and they don't even know you're a woman. So I guess they've realized we don't have much choice because women are going to study it anyway. And the third one, okay, I'm going to save the third one for last because this is still the big problem today, because I want to tell you a bit about the research that I had to do and the cool stuff that I learned. In all of my books, I learned amazing things about Judaism and women in Judaism that no one seemed to know about. In Rashi's Daughters, the thing that got me so excited is I learned that it was Rashi's community of women who popularized the Shabbat lighting and ritual. It turned it into a ritual, turned it into a mitzvah, came up with a blessing for it. We assume that, like Sarah did it in her tent. And actually you assume that because Rashi says in his commentary on that piece of Genesis that Sarah lit the light in her Shabbat lamp in her tent. And I don't know if but in any case, we know about it because this was very controversial. You're not allowed to say any blessings other than the ones in the Talmud. Women know now, we ignore that to come up with all kinds of new rituals and blessings. So, but anyway, this was, the rabbis didn't want you doing it. We're talking 11th century France. So they, but somehow, let's face it, Hanukkah's long behind us, but is coming up soon. And the blessing for lighting the Hanukkah lamp, Bracha Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kadashanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Hanukkah. That blessing is in the Talmud because Hanukkah was created by the rabbis of the Talmud. And they tell you about the 8 days that the oil, I mean, there's no place else. They didn't come up with that till like the Talmud is created 500 years later or more. Anyway, so they did not want to go anything about fighting the society soldiers who were in charge because the Romans were in charge when the rabbis were there and they didn't want to provoke them. So they came up with the light business and the little vats of oil that lasted 8 days. But anyway, so you have this blessing in the Talmud. And one of the ritual obligations that women were obligated to do, even from the Talmud, most of them they're not, but Passover. Let's face it, if women aren't obligated to Passover, you're not going to have Passover because nobody's going to put it together. And Shabbat also, women are obligated to that. They were also obligated to do everything you do at Purim because of Esther's the star. And they obligated women to Hanukkah. There's a woman that participated in that miracle, according to the Talmud. And what that meant is that a man who's traveling around during Hanukkah time, he doesn't have to worry about lighting a lamp for the 8 days because his wife is doing it at home. And as long as his household is doing it, he's covered. So you can imagine in Rashi's time, or somebody, it's Shabbat during Hanukkah, and the woman has just lit the Hanukkah lights, right? Because after Shabbat, you're not going to light any lights. So she's lit the Hanukkah lights. She said the blessing. She turns around. She goes to light the Shabbat lamp, and I don't know, the Shekhinah is there, something. She doesn't know she's not supposed to make up new blessings because she's never studied Talmud. And she just says the same blessing and says Ner Shel Shabbat instead of Hanukkah. And next thing you know, her daughters are doing it, her sister's doing it, all the women in their community are doing it. The men know nothing because they're in synagogue on Friday afternoon. So they don't know what the women are doing at home. And eventually it spreads so far that within 100 years, people are writing to Maimonides and complaining that women are making up this blessing. And they're saying, what are we going to do? And Maimonides says, oh, it's a nice minhag. He doesn't even call it a mitzvah. Rashi calls it a mitzvah. Yes, and Rabbeinu Tam, Rashi's son, writes in their ritual manual for their community that women who light the Hanukkah lamp should say the blessing, but he doesn't tell you what the blessing is. Everybody, it's so well known, they know. So, and the response of Maimonides is, oh, it's a nice custom. It's a nice minhag. If the women want to do it, we can't prevent them. So you can tell how wise he is, because he knows he can't prevent the women from saying whatever they want to say when they light the lamp. And by the 1300s, you have special, beautiful lamps for lighting on Shabbat, not the same old lamp you light the rest of the week. I saw the exhibit at Israel Museum and was, okay, there you have it in 300 years from violating Talmud to universal. And now, of course, everybody assumes that the Hanukkah one, it comes from the Shabbat one. But no, the Shabbat one is actually 1,000 years newer. So that just blew my mind. I learned a ton of cool stuff about women and sorcery, which has worked its way into our prayer book. And from studying what I needed to know about Rav Hizda's daughter, and all that, the women were writing the amulets. And I keep saying, I really should go into the business of writing, because the most popular amulet back in those times was to win at chariot races. And they found these in the old Colosseums. And I thought, man, I really got to get into business writing amulets for sports teams. And God knows the Dodgers really needed it this year. We need it, and it wouldn't be very expensive anyway, maybe I keep saying this. Anyway, so the cool stuff that I learned researching The Chosen, you think, how could we're talking that takes place in the 1950s. What is it that I couldn't have known about women? Well, two big things. First of all, you're probably all familiar with the OU kashrut symbol. That, you see it on your milk, you see it on your cornflakes, you see it everywhere. A lot of people see it and they think it's some kind of trademark thing because it's in, but we know what it is. And even my friends who aren't Jewish but are vegetarians look for that, because then they know if it's D or P or wherever, they know there's no meat in there if it has a hechsher. So where did those come from? They're almost exactly 100 years old. And what happened, and from New York, is the early 1900s, right about the 1920s or so, you're starting to have processed foods in the stores. You have canned foods, you have packaged foods, you have Coca-Cola in whatever, I guess it was glass bottles back in those days. But you're starting to get all these processed foods, and Jewish women, they don't know, are these kosher? Are they not kosher? And their kid is complaining, how come I can't have sunshine cookies like my friends? How come I can't drink soda like them? And it's getting really frustrating for women. And a group of Orthodox sisterhood women, they call them Women's Branch in those days, talk about afsaluchas and chutzpah. These women on their own initiative approached the big food processors about allowing kosher supervision. And let's face it, for a sunshine cookie, which doesn't have any kind of non-kosher thing in it, or for Coca-Cola for that matter, it wouldn't cost them anything. The women said, we'll provide you the rabbi to watch. And then you'll get to put this little symbol on your food. And then people, Jewish women who buy lots of their products, they will buy your products. And they certainly won't buy the competitors' products that don't have a symbol on them. And they managed to convince, like right away, they convinced like 4 or 5 of the big ones. They convinced Coca-Cola, who never gives anybody their secret formula, right? They're famous that nobody knows what's in Coca-Cola. Well, those women knew. Anyway, Coca-Cola and they were really smart. The businesses, I don't know whether they said, we don't want anything Jewish about this symbol, or whether the women said there shouldn't be any. So they came up with the OU. Nobody, you look at that, it doesn't look Jewish. As I said, a lot of people think it's some trademark kind of thing, which is a circle with a C. I mean, it's almost the same symbol. But within, they managed to get Coca-Cola, they got Heinz, they got Campbell's soups, they got Sunshine cookies, and they got Crisco, because that was a big one. It wasn't lard, and it wasn't milk. And women could, you knew you could bake with it. And there were times when you couldn't get butter and stuff because there was a war on. Anyway, by the night, so they managed to get these 5 big food manufacturers to sign up. And within 10 years, in the 1930s, you've got 100, it's spread. It was really for competitive reasons. And let's face it, there are lots of Jews who buy kosher hot dogs because they think, as the saying goes, we have higher standards. We answer to higher authority. So in New York, that happened. I was like, wow, all these textures, because Jewish women insisted that they needed them. The other cool thing also with Jewish women is by the early 1950s, certainly by the 1940s, even Orthodox women had stopped going to the mikveh. It became so unused for several reasons. First of all, the women that came to New York, that came to America from the old country, like the turn of the century, 1900s, they came usually as single women, and they met husbands, or they were recently married. Their husband was here and he brought them over, but their mothers stayed in the old country. And they didn't have rabbis and mikveh manuals. Just before a woman would get married, her mother would explain to her this stuff. And, okay, she would, after she got up from the floor, anyway, her mother would kind of see her through this and explain what she needed to do. No rabbis were involved at all. And the rabbis didn't supervise mikvahs. It's like, somebody dug a hole in the basement, or, if you lived in Europe, there were creeks and ponds and lakes and all kinds of places you could immerse. You get to New York City, and there's a few mikvahs around that are old, and the water, and they're in basements of buildings. They're not out in the countryside. God, I was going to say, bring up mikvah, and the one guy here is out the door. So I couldn't resist that. Sorry. He's going to get an earful anyway. So women didn't know anything. When they went in, before they got married, the rabbi gave them this booklet of what they were supposed to do, which, if their hair wasn't curly before, it was curly. And if it used to be curly, it was straight. Is they're reading about what? And their husbands just as much. So it's like, what? We can't have sex 2 weeks out of a month? I says, but in any case, when women actually, so it's, before their wedding, and they find out where a local mikveh is, and they go in there. And I could be gentle and say the sanitary requirements or aesthetics that people have back in 1900 were less than now, but I don't think that's quite it. The mikvahs were filthy. The water was collected from the rain in a cistern on the roof. It would come down into, essentially, imagine a very large tin can in the basement, and nobody ever cleaned it. The only way it got emptied is when it rained and more water came through there. And I know this for several reasons. Partly, as I was doing research into it, I became really good friends with the Jewish studies professor at the University of Connecticut, who's the expert on the history of mikvahs in North America. But what I did come up with first, looking at around mikvahs, just Googling, and I got to admit, the big difference between the research for The Choice and for all my other books is I'm doing 1950s New York. There is so much. New York Times, every issue since 18 something or other is digitalized and searchable on the internet. I could have spent the rest of my life reading the New York Times. And so I found lots and lots of stuff. There were so many amazing things that, you know, I could put into, I needed to put in to like set the scene, and you know where we are and you're immersed in the life. This is when the polio vaccine comes out. 1955, I remember waiting in line, getting it in kindergarten. And how excited and thrilled particularly all the mothers were that their kid was not going to get polio. Those of us younger just cannot even imagine how terrified everybody was of polio. You know, and I'm not even going to get into the anti-vaxxers now. Curse them, maybe they all get polio. But anyway, so I definitely had to include that in there. I included that the Dead Sea Scrolls had been discovered and hidden for a long time, but in the early 1950s, when Israel managed to sneakily get a hold of them and put them in their museum, like this was big news. There was also the communist scares. The Congress is investigating it. The Committee on Un-American Activities is going on. And if you read Davita's Harp, you know that my heroine's mother was a communist. So of course I'm going to have to drag her into that. You have the Kinsey Report on Women comes out in 1954. It's a bestseller on the New York Times book list for 3 years. I got a copy out of my local library and I learned a lot, actually. But anyway, you know, I like to have hot sex scenes and they have to be halakhic. But I also needed to know, okay, women are all going to be reading this. And so what would my characters have thought of all this? But the big one, and this was my favorite research thing, the World Series in 1955. The Brooklyn Dodgers have been rivals with the New York Yankees since forever. And they always lose. They get to the World Series and it's, oh, maybe next year. 1955, the Brooklyn Dodgers won the World Series in 7 games. And in that final game, there is one inning that is considered one of the most exciting in baseball, where the best hitter of the New York Yankees. I'm trying to think of his name back. No, Babe Ruth's like way earlier than that. No, this is in 1955. Anyway, they're really, it'll come to me when I leave. Or you can look on, just Google it. Anyway, they're down like 1-0 or something. It's the 9th or the 8th inning. And he gets up there and he's the home run hitter. And it's a full count. I mean, it's as exciting as you can get. And he hits and he hits this long fly ball that looks for sure that it's going to be at least a double. And there's a guy in first and a guy in third. So that would be it. They would win. And the outfielder runs over, his name I remember, Danny Amoris. He runs over and he jumps in the air. And not only does he catch the ball, a fly ball, he spins and throws it to first base and makes a double play. That's it. The inning's over. And the crowd goes crazy. And I know this because it had been on television, so it's on YouTube. I watched that game many times. I watched that inning lots of times because I wanted to describe it with the excitement that my characters would be feeling. They've been set up for this game as a blind date by their fathers. So, and of course, if you've read the shows, okay, room full of women. So who's got a cough drop in their purse? There always is. My grandmother carried those all. The Cantor. What flavor? Anyway. So, the Cantor, of course, would need that. So that scene, I knew, when I read about that, I thought, okay, that is so going in this book. But the way that I know about the mikveh debacle is that I found the 1910 New York City Health Department inspection reports online. Because at this point, the New York City Health Department is starting to do their job. And there's lots of Russian baths and Turkish baths and swimming pools and things that the health department is inspecting to make sure they're sanitary. And somehow they learn about these mikvahs. And you can only imagine. I mean, the reports are scathing. So, but they can't shut them down politically. And, you know, the outrage in the Jewish community, the Orthodox Jewish community would be terrible. So they say, okay, all of the old mikvahs are grandfathered in, but all your new mikvahs have to meet these new, more exacting health standards. The trouble is, it cost a lot of money to build a new mikvah to those standards. Plus, at this point, the rabbis have gotten involved because when they heard that the New York City Health Department wanted to shut down the mikvahs, boy, that got that up. So they now wanted to be involved in how you're going to build the new ones. So it got even more complicated. Anyway, as expensive as they were, nobody built any. Women in synagogues, sisterhood said, we're not raising money for this. We're raising money for schools. They weren't going into the mikvahs anyway. They were going into their own bathtubs because we had indoor plumbing. A woman who went to one of those old mikvahs, like before her wedding, the first thing she would have done when she got home was go in her own bathtub and get clean. And you don't have to be Einstein to say, wait a second, I've got a perfectly good bathtub in my house. Why do I need to go to this mikveh first? Nobody explains anything to you. Oh, she's just a woman. She doesn't need to know. She can't study Talmud and find out what the requirements are. Anyway, so by like 1950, even Orthodox women had abandoned the mikvahs. And we know this because I happen to have a mikvah, I have a collection of mikvah manuals. And I have one from 1960 that explains all the usual stuff and the admonitions and the horrible things that will happen and the bad children you will have if you don't go to the mikvah. So in the back of the mikvah manual, it has a list of all the kosher mikvahs in North America, should the woman be going someplace out of town and need to go to one. Yeah, kid. What can I say? I have 6 grandchildren, 5 of them are boys. So as long as there's no screams of pain that are too loud, I don't care. So New York City, Manhattan, you want to guess how many mikvahs there were? 3. 1960. You know how many Jewish women are living there? Yeah. Okay. So you can just tell nobody is going very much. But Orthodoxy has gotten their act together, and the mikvahs are like spas, and there's the ecumenical mikvot because conservative movement and reform movement are big into conversions, and you should go to the mikveh first. And it's interesting, my husband is a reform convert, but that was way back in 1970. So nobody went to mikvahs then. But my son-in-law is a reform convert, and he went to the mikveh at, we called it UJ back then. I mean, that place is like a spa. I went once just to check it out. My daughter, before she got married, in Los Angeles, we have a big Persian community, and there's a tradition when the woman goes before her wedding to the mikveh, it's party time at the mikveh. All your girlfriends come, you throw candies, so anyway, so my daughter, she'd already been living with him for 6 years, and she went to the mikveh before they got married. So the mikvahs are not, there are even more of them now than there was. Oh. Oh, yeah, that's an Israel thing. Yeah, especially because, I mean, that's another reason women didn't want to go, because people see you go, they know why, you know, you're going to have sex that night. Or if like a few months go by and nobody's seen you go to the mikveh, you're pregnant, or whatever. Anyway, so that was very interesting that I got to learn the kind of history and the ins and outs of how there got to be the kind of mikvahs we have in America now, which we didn't have. I mean, by 1940s, it looked for sure that was going to be the end, that they just wouldn't, nobody was building any, and nobody wanted to build any. And people who really felt they needed to immerse in something, well, you had the Schwitz, you had the Turkish bath, you have the Russian bath. According to the conservative movement, the home swimming pool is a perfectly kosher mikveh. If you've ever looked at a swimming pool at home and you go, why not? This thing certainly has more than enough water, and nobody is carrying it into the pool.
We actually use
Yeah, I mean, anyway, so there's now that Reform and Conservative are into using mikvahs, they've loosened up. They've gone back to like the Torah requirements. I also happen to got to be really good friends with one of the women rabbis on the conservative movement's law committee. She wrote the lenient opinion on mikvah use, and so that was very useful. Wait, I'll take my questions at the end because I just want to finish up like I call the good, the bad, and the ugly of the Talmud's inequalities for women. We've solved two of them, or we've gotten rid of two of them. The marriage one is still here. If you've ever heard of agunah, if you've ever heard of this problem in Israel and in New York City, that according to the way the medieval rabbis, this is not actually even in the Talmud, but they've interpreted, since the man acquires the woman as a wife, she does not acquire him. Although in a modern ceremony, we have two rings and we say the harayat both genders. But traditionally, a man acquires the woman, and rabbis later on had said, well, that means he is the only one who can unacquire her. She cannot free herself from this other than killing him. I mean, he either divorces her or he dies. That's how she gets to be unmarried again. And this has gotten to the point today. Okay, and in the medieval times, they actually had ways to kind of avoid this. Women had, in Rashi's community, a divorce that was continued. Okay, wait, I've got this. I'm not going to spit out that had contingencies. That if he wasn't back in a certain amount of time, she had this conditional get that she takes to the Beit Din, and then she's divorced. And there's actually kind of a funny example that usually they would say, it depends on how he was traveling. Is he going to India, then it's 2 years, or usually it was 6 months. So they have this one example that came to the Beit Din where it was the day before the 6-month limit is up. And he comes back to his town, and there's a river running through the town, which is not surprising in Ashkenaz. So he's on the other side of the river from their house. And the ferry has already stopped running for the evenings. So he's on the other side. Next morning, he's not there. Boom, she's at the Beit Din and says, here's my conditional get. I want my ketubah. We're divorced. And the man says, no, I'm here. I was here. And the rabbis say, no, you weren't here. You weren't home. You were not back. And you live in this town. You know very well that the ferry stops running at a certain time. You should have made sure you got your butt over to the right side of the river if this was important to you. She gets her divorce and her ketubah. Obviously, she didn't like the guy because a woman who loved her husband wouldn't care. It wouldn't be the next morning. She'd be happy to see him whenever he showed up. But the point is that almost all women had a conditional get, that if something happened and the husband was gone, if he didn't make it back, she could go to the court and get divorced. And the later rabbis, when you get to like the 1500s and in Israel today, they will not accept a although I've heard that Orthodoxy is starting to come up with a halachic conditional get. Actually, it's a halachic prenup that gives her various outs. In Sepharad, if they have them in the Cairo Geniza, women wrote gets to their husbands. Women wanted to divorce her husband, she gave him a get. And that certainly made it easy. And also that in their ketubah, which nowadays is boilerplate, back then it was a real contract. It was like you brought in your lawyers and you negotiated all this stuff, and they have ketubot that are right in the contract that she can divorce him and she can give him a get. So 1,000 years ago, they fixed it. Now it's worse than ever. Men are in the Orthodox community are blackmailing their wives. They say, you got to pay me X amount, thousands of dollars for the divorce. Otherwise, I'm going to keep the children. Isn't that nice? Orthodoxy. And he can marry someone else because according to halakha, a man can have more than one wife. They never got rid of that one. Yeah, but it only lasts 1,000 years. We're past that. It was in Rashi's time. We're done. So anyway, this is still a big problem in Orthodox communities, and especially in Israel, where the rabbinate controls everything. As I said, I don't have that problem. I married a Reform convert. He's not Jewish, according to the rabbinate. So I'm not married. So I don't have to worry about it. So that's actually a way out for Reform and conservative women, is to marry. I'm not saying you should marry a convert for that reason, that you won't ever get stuck in this. You should you should marry a convert because we want to get more Jews to come in and we want to have more Jewish children. But anyway, we won't go there. But the point is, the marriage problems, and I'm just barely going to allude to the Levirate marriage law in the Torah, where if a married man dies before they have kids, his wife is obligated to marry his brother. Yeah. And that the rabbinate in Israel still insists is in effect. And so, but there is a ceremony for him to get out of this. But that's another thing. The brothers, they ask for money also. You want me to give you this ceremony and do chalitza? You pay me. The woman can't marry again. Well, if she wants to stay Orthodox, let's face it, she can get married in a court and they don't care. And anyway, the conservative movement has put what they call the Lieberman clause into their ketubas so that will prevent this problem later. And that was very cool because the Lieberman clause came in 1954. So I got to use that as one of the conflicts. Believe me, mikveh is going to be a conflict between my characters. I mean, this is a romance novel. A girl meets boy, girl gets boy, girl loses boy, girl gets boy, girl loses boy again. Yeah, I mean, you know the drill. And so I had to come up with the various conflicts at which they would lose each other before they finally end up with the happy, happy ending. The wedding night is not the happy ending. You'll notice that because it's like, wait, this is, there's still 100 pages more. But I do feel like this is one of my best endings for any of my novels, other than perhaps the ending of book 1 of Rashi's Daughters, Yocheved. And that was a big mistake I learned later. When you're writing a trilogy, you do not put a really nice happy ending in book 1. Nobody reads the other 2 books. And I can see from my sales that's anyway. So those are the 3 things I'm looking at. You're going to know by the time you finish this book besides getting a good read, all of the laws and ins and outs of how that happened. And as well as what I say, my second best ending, and do not go to the end of the book and look, although I've already just given you that. All right, so there were some people with questions. I want a quick, at least the shameless commerce. I have lots of already signed copies of the choice. They're $15 each for the real book. I'll throw in 50 Shades of Talmud for $5. If you've been to the Ready Teller and you have a 20, but I do take credit cards. And also for the people who are e-readers, who don't want to bring another big heavy book back into their house, you can get, and actually we don't have chat, right? This is streaming. Okay, text her. I'm going to give you the website. It's payhip.com, which is for independent publishers and authors to sell their own stuff, or any kind of publisher to sell their works, the e-version, without having to go through Amazon, who takes half the money. This way, they take a small fee and I get the money. So I encourage you to buy your ebooks through PayHip and www.payhip, all one word.com. And you'll search for the choice. You'll search for Maggie Anton, same way you would search for a book on any other bookseller. Oh, yes. Right, of course. Oh, we have another mic for the questions. Oh, then I can be mic'd for my answer. Oh, you're so well prepared.
Well, it's not actually a question. It's more of a statement. When I was married with 2 children when I went to Israel, and I wanted to go to the mikvah. So I went to the mikvah and I did everything they said to do, except at the end, she said, she offered me a cookie. And I said, oh, thank you. She said, no, I need the prayer over the cookie.
Oh.
Well, I was Reform. I didn't know any prayer of the cookie. So I said the prayer over bread. That's all I could do. Okay. And one other remark, I did, although I was married in a Reformed synagogue, my husband was conservative. And
intermarriage.
Wait, interfaith. Yeah. So when we got divorced, we went for dinner and divorce. We went to San Francisco to a tribunal of Orthodox rabbis to get a get. And I got my get. No bribery, no blackmail.
No. If you married a nice guy and you have a friendly divorce, it's not a problem. But for the small minority of women, this can be the worst kind of hell. And by all means, get more food. I don't, there was someone else had a question. I thought. Oh, good. Okay.
I have many.
Oh, she's been collecting the questions.
So one area of research I'm wondering about, the heroine has been in Israel and is opening up stories and interviews and revealing information about Israel. So I'm curious about what was behind that part of the story.
Okay. My heroines, for those of you who read Davita's Harp, know she has an aunt who was a nurse in war zones like throughout the Western world. And I give you a backstory of why she became that nurse and why she did it. And she had been in Ethiopia. She'd been in the Spanish American War. And of course, for World War II, the Army would have grabbed her right away because she'd already had 20 years. So I made her like a captain in the Women's Nursing Corps of the Army. And she was stationed in the DP camps because boy, did they need nurses. And the Army just wanted to get all these people cleared out and not responsible. So all the nurses they could get. And then, when Israel became a state, and so they are getting immigrants like crazy from all over the place, many of whom were in pretty sad physical shape. And even then the Jews were sneaking in before they. So I thought, well, this is great. My character I've already put her in Europe in the displaced persons camps. Of course, and she's a religious Christian. She's going to jump at the chance to serve in Israel to help move this process along and get the survivors of the Holocaust out of Europe. Those who want to go, they're going to get them over there. And so she's working in these camps. It's like, oh man, I need help. And she gets her niece, my heroine, to spend her summer vacations from college in Israel, helping with these, especially since a lot of the Arab countries who kicked all their Jews out, the women in there did not want to see men, and the men did not want to see their wives and their daughters with male doctors or male medics. So nurses were really very much needed there. So I have my character spend 4 summers from 1949 or 1950 to 54. I know 1949 to 1953. She spends the summer in Israel, and it gave me a chance to do research into all those refugee camps and what it was like for the Iraqi refugees, the Yemenite refugees, the European ones, the communist countries. I believe it was in 1950. They, in Eastern Europe, they emptied out all the nursing homes, all the hospitals, every old decrepit Jew that they had got sent to Israel. Which I mean, this is stuff that, you know, people are only writing about it kind of recently. And that was another thank you for asking that, because that was fascinating research to learn what it was like in those camps, and eventually, and how involved the US Army was. And eventually the Israeli army blossomed into like a real army, and they had lots of people, and they had expertly trained people, and they just took over the camps. And besides, by 1953, you didn't have so many people coming anymore as you had in the earlier years. So that was a way of giving a backstory to the aunt, and also making, you know, taking advantage of the interesting research and giving my heroine a more broad background in what was happening. So that's, you know, who knows how I came up with that, but there's a lot of books on it. And the best ones are more recent, where they're interviewing people who came through that and have no reason to be silent anymore. And by the way, my daughter-in-law is Iraqi Israeli, and all her parents, and especially all her grandparents, were in that 1947 or 50, 49, kicked out of Iraq. And the stories that her grandmother told were just like, were amazing. My bibliography is on the website. Go to thechoicenovel.com, and there's, under resources, I have and I keep the bibliography pretty much up to date. My webmaster is very good at, you know, when I read another book. But yeah, those, all of my resources are on there. And in the very back of The Choice is a list of all the sugya, which page of Talmud this particular discussion came from. If you want to go look it up, Safaria is free. It is the best Talmud source. If you want to see a good English translation, you don't get the commentaries on that. Some of the other, you know, some of the other printed volumes are better, but support Safaria. It is just fabulous website, fabulous resource of all kinds of Jewish sources that are very searchable. Oh, no, it has the entire Talmud and a very good English translation. Yeah. It doesn't have Rashi. I mean, actually, it has Rashi. He's got his own thing of his stuff that he said, but you won't get every comment from like medieval Tosafot and things like that. You got to go up there, right? I'll have to remember if someone asks from down here that I need to repeat it, or at least make my answer obvious. By all means, get more food. Come on, who am I to stand between Jews and food?
one of the things you said really struck a chord. When I was doing an autobiography in 8th grade, my father told me the story that his great grandfather lived in Hungary and he went out to sea. That was his job. And he divorced his wife every time he went
Oh, yes.
and married her again. So I'm wondering
Yeah.
if it's, as you were saying, that there was a prenup or whatever it
Well,
was.
he got around it without having to do a prenup. By the way, what time is it? Okay,
Yeah.
I'm speaking in Palo Alto at 1. So I just, oh, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely.
Anyway,
Yeah,
I
so
thought
he
there
got
was,
around it that way of
Yeah.
divorcing her and then,
yeah, so it was interesting that you brought that up. Thank you.
no, now you know why he did that. Very conscientious, conscientious husband. My grandmother, who is not one of those people who, was in an arranged marriage and it became wonderful, like Fiddler on the Roof. She hated her husband. And as soon as she got to America, he was here first. He brought her over because there were children involved, and in particular, a son. She's sure that if she'd only had daughters, he would have left them all in Romania. But anyway, he brought her over, and the first thing she did was go to a secular court in Detroit and divorce him. She didn't care. She wasn't Orthodox. As far as she concerned, Orthodox Judaism was, anyway. Typical secular Jews. I mean, people came over and abandoned Orthodoxy in droves. So she got a divorce, and that was that. And then she had 4 more husbands. And I don't know what happened there, whether who got divorced or who died or who disappeared, but oh man, I wish I had questioned her more. That would have made some story. The book signing and selling tables. And if I didn't mention it, I take credit cards on Square. Just. Oh, yes, you should. Yeah, yes. Yes, by all means, publicize anything, the synagogue you need to do. And thank you, Cantor. I'm keeping these. I mean, I have 2 more gigs today, so I'll keep these.
After I purchase 2 of Maggie Anton's books, I will be then going on to the next event that we're having, which is writing postcards
Oh,
for
yes.
the Get Out the Vote in southern states. It is a nonpartisan postcard that is written, letting people in some states today, it will be Alabama, the phone number of their registrar, county registrar, a phone number for getting a ride to the polls, and also like the dates of when early voting starts and ends. So if you have time, we'll have some postcards out. I am not sure where they set us up. They said it depended on the weather, and if or not, they got the sukkah down in time.
Very good. That is so important. All right, I'm going to move to the back. If you have a private question.